Hi, folks. Let's talk about the absolute circus we're living in right now, where the truth gets filtered through 10 layers of progressive doublespeak. California Democrats, the same people who claim to be the guardians of human rights, are now clutching their pearls over a bill that would make it a felony to buy teenagers for sex because it's not equitable enough. I mean, did the moral compass in Sacramento just break, or did they just swap it for a DEI checklist? Today, we're diving into the political sewage, where Democrat Representative Nick Schultz decided protecting kids was just too knee-jerk for his taste. So grab your hazmat suits, folks, because the left's priorities are about to get exposed. And let's just say they're as twisted as their talking points.
So right now in Sacramento, there is a well-known blade. KCRA did a documentary on it. It's just a few miles away from here. Sheriff Jim Cooper has said that right now, if a John were to go and try to purchase a 16 or 17-year-old on that blade, and law enforcement were to intervene, because of a judge's order right now in Sacramento, law enforcement would not be able to put that person in jail because it's not the solid felony that law enforcement has been asking it to be. So I just want to make sure, like, you're okay with 16 and 17-year-olds continuing to be purchased on this blade for the next year or until you have to dissect this issue in the fall, and these Johns getting let go and just issued with citations?
Well, I don't agree with the premise of the question, but what I would say is I'm not okay with any child anywhere being exploited, but the solution that we craft, the solution that we pass needs to make sense, it needs to be equitable, it needs to be comprehensive. And while I appreciate Assemblymember Krell for bringing the proposal forward, and I know that her heart is on this issue, it's connected in a way that few other legislators can really be equal to or understand, it's also my job to make sure that we're not just passing knee-jerk policy, but we're having good substantive conversation and landing on a good spot. So to the sheriff, the district attorney, and any other stakeholders, I hope that they'll continue to engage not just with Assemblymember Krell, but with all the members of the committee, with myself, with our staff, and our goal is to get a good solution delivered here as quickly as possible.
Let's cut through the academic fog and get right to the core of what just happened. A sitting Democrat in California, State Representative Nick Schultz, refused to support a bill that would make it a felony to buy 16 and 17-year-olds for sex. His reasoning, it wasn't equitable enough. Think about that. Equity, not justice, not protection of minors, not even basic decency. The moral defense being mounted here is that unless a law accounts for every imagined intersexual nuance, we should keep letting predators walk away with simply a citation. That's not compassion. That's complicity dressed up in graduate school jargon. And this isn't some fringe voice. This is mainstream Democrat leadership in a state where the ideological engine of the left churns out policy faster than Hollywood churns out remakes. What Schultz is saying, if you strip away the consultant speak, is that the optics of enforcement matter more than the reality of exploitation. This is what happens when moral clarity is replaced with moral relativism, when every issue is filtered through a DEI lens so warped it can't distinguish between helping victims and protecting abusers. So how do we get here? Simple. A decades-long cultural campaign to equate enforcement with oppression and consequence with inequality. The same people who say they want to protect marginalized communities have created a framework so abstract, so bogged down in pseudo-intellectual language that actual harm is excused if stopping it might upset the wrong ideological apple cart. It's all theory, zero humanity. We're seeing a political class so paralyzed by its own identity politics that it can't even bring itself to say, yes, buying children is evil and people who do it should go to prison. That should be a bipartisan layup. But instead, we get lectures about needing more comprehensive solutions. So let me ask you, how comprehensive does it need to be to protect a teenager from being sold? What kind of equity are we talking about when the scales of justice are tipping toward the predators and not the victims? This moment should be a wake-up call, not just for Californians, but for anyone still holding out hope that the modern progressive movement has a moral compass left. What Nick Schultz revealed, intentionally or not, is that for too many in power, the process has become more important than the outcome. That abstract fairness has trumped real-world safety, and that ideological purity matters more than protecting actual human lives. So if you're wondering why faith in institutions is collapsing, why the average American is tuning out elite narratives, it's because of moments like this. When the people in charge choose performative politics over protecting kids, the mask slips. And what's underneath isn't justice, it's pure cowardice. And if you thought we hit the bottom of the well, there's always Jasmine Crockett to take us a bit lower.
As far as I'm concerned, you randomly kidnapping folk and you throwing them out of the country against their civil rights, against their constitutional rights. And frankly, how would they feel if some other country decided that they were going to just start throwing people randomly in our country? Like that is absolutely insane.
That's what they did.
So yes, all I got to say is y'all need to get these fools out of here.
That is quite literally what those foreign countries did. In fact, during the height of the Biden border crisis, even Axios reported that Venezuela and other regimes were deliberately emptying their prisons and sending violent criminals to the United States under the guise of mass migration. So when Representative Jasmine Crockett throws up her hands and says, how would it feel if countries sent people to our country? Well, they did. They are. And the only thing more absurd than her rhetorical question is the fact that she seems blissfully unaware of the answer. This isn't just a slip up or a gaffe. It's a perfect snapshot of the cultural and intellectual rot in our political discourse. We have members of Congress reacting emotionally, uncritically, and with no grasp of basic facts because the dominant ideology in their Democrat circles rewards that. They're trained not to seek truth, but to perform outrage. And in that theater, logic is the enemy and victimhood is a currency. For years, the left has sold the American people on the idea that borders are racist, enforcement is oppression, and that anyone skeptical of mass illegal immigration is motivated by bigotry. But now, as blue cities buckle under the weight of their own sanctuary policies and crime tied to unvetted migration spikes, the consequences can't be ignored. So instead of accountability, we get deflection. We get Jasmine Crockett, who, rather than engage with the reality of cartels, failed asylum systems, or hostile foreign actors gaming U.S. policy, just yells about how deporting people is somehow kidnapping. This is where weaponized empathy leads us, to a place where the rights of foreign nationals who entered here illegally are discussed more passionately than the safety of American citizens, especially the working class communities actually dealing with the fallout. It's an inversion of priorities born out of a political culture that values narrative over evidence, optics over outcomes. And let's be honest, the only reason this kind of rhetoric still survives is because the media, academia, and activist institutions continue to launder it as moral authority. They've built an entire infrastructure that treats feelings as policy and frames facts as threats. That's why someone like Crockett can go viral for spewing nonsense instead of getting laughed off the floor of Congress. But the tide is shifting with Trump back in office and the public growing increasingly fed up with the manufactured chaos. These bad faith arguments are finally colliding with reality because people are waking up to the fact that compassion without order is not noble, it's negligent. Even in the Bible, they discuss the sovereignty of nations, how it's important that nations maintain their sovereignty. And if the left keeps choosing ideology over country, the only thing they'll be deporting is their own credibility, which, by the way, pretty sure a lot of Americans think they already did.
The reason that they can sit there and take this vote and not even blink is because so many of them sit in privilege. When I look across that aisle, I don't know. I think we have one person that may have a little bit of melanin. For the most part, they vote.
Interesting that Jasmine Crockett wants to lecture anyone about privilege. She's a black woman in America in 2025, arguably the single most celebrated identity in today's cultural hierarchy. We live in a country where Joe Biden, during his presidency, made it a point of pride that he appointed more black female judges than any president in U.S. history, according to the White House. In fact, over 70% of his confirmed judicial nominees were women, and nearly 30% were black women, according to the Brookings Institution. The New York State Appellate Division alone, the first department, became over 90% black women in 2024, following a wave of diversity-driven appointments, according to the New York Law Journal. And this despite the fact that black women make only about 8% of U.S. law school graduates each year, according to the American Bar Association. That's not meritocracy, that's literally engineering. And look, it's not necessarily wrong to strive for representation, but don't turn around and pretend you're some powerless outsider fighting the system when the system is actively bending over backwards to center you. Now, to be absolutely clear, Crockett isn't some disenfranchised citizen yelling from the outside. She's a sitting member of Congress. Her salary, her platform, her voice, they're all paid by the American people. And yet here she is reducing the opposing party to the color of their skin, sneering at the lack of melanin, as if race is the only credential that truly matters. This isn't a critique of policy. It's not even a serious argument. It's race baiting at its laziest, most performative form. So let's be clear, race is not privilege. That's the myth at the heart of the cultural Marxist worldview the modern left has adopted. Privilege is about power, access, insulation, and consequence. And in 2025, the real privilege isn't about being born white. It's being untouchable because of your identity group. It's being able to say blatantly racist and false things on the House floor without so much as a wrist slap. It's knowing the media will frame you as brave while labeling anyone who challenges your rhetoric as a threat to democracy. What this moment reveals is just how far we've drifted from the original civil rights vision, a society where content of character mattered more than color of skin. Instead, we've built a new caste system based on identity points, where being a minority doesn't just open doors, it shuts down all criticism. This is why public trust is collapsing, because Americans, especially the working class, see right through this kind of stuff. They know real privilege when they see it. It's not a rural dad with 2 jobs voting Republican. It's a congresswoman on a taxpayer-funded microphone telling you that your skin tone totally disqualifies your opinion. We got here because too many people were afraid to call this nonsense for what it is. But now the backlash is building. People are tired of the double standards, tired of being told they're the problem based solely on what they look like. If the left wants to keep clinging to race as a political weapon, they should brace for a cultural reckoning, because identity politics is past its expiration date. And Jasmine Crockett just proved it.
Listen, I'm gonna tell you this. People tried to talk about the mental acuity of Joe Biden, and as someone who was able to interact with him, I never questioned his mental acuity. But come on now. Come on, like, you are crashing the economy.
It is absolutely unbelievable that anyone with a shred of decency would still defend weekend at Bernie's Joe Biden's mental acuity, especially after the American people resoundingly rejected the Democrat Party for the very lies and cover-ups that kept them propped up like a political puppet on a teleprompter. And yet here we are in 2025 listening to Representative Jasmine Crockett claim with a straight face that she never questioned Biden's mental acuity. Really? Was she in the same room as the rest of us? Or did she watch the debate against Trump? Or did she mistake the glazed over stares, incoherent answers, and confused stage exits for presidential brilliance? Let's not even pretend this is an honest take. Crockett's not speaking truth. She's protecting the narrative, because admitting that Biden was in cognitive decline would mean admitting the left lied. Not just to the public, but to themselves. For years, we watched the media, Hollywood, and elected Democrats perform synchronized damage control every time Biden forgot where he was or what decade he was, or just start doing handshakes with ghosts. They called it a stutter. They called it disinformation. They gaslit the country while he struggled to finish a sentence without help. But now that he's out of office, now we're suddenly hearing whispers from the same party insiders who swore he was sharp as ever. The NBC's, Politicos, and even George Clooney, some of his former staffers as well, have come clean that yes, the decline was real and obvious, and yes, they actively suppressed concerns to avoid handing Republicans a win. So when Jasmine Crockett plays dumb in 2025, it's not just embarrassing. It's an insult to the intelligence of every American who had to endure 4 years of media malpractice and elite delusion. This moment reveals something deeper than just partisanship. It shows how deeply the left has fused identity and ideology with institutional power. Admitting failure, whether it's on the economy, immigration, or a clearly unfit president, is seen as betrayal. So instead of course correcting, they double down. They rewrite history. They rely on loyal foot soldiers like Crockett to keep the fantasy alive long after it's collapsed under its own weight. This is why we got here, because the Democrat Party decided that narrative control was more important than national interest, that image mattered more than competence. And for all their talk about defending democracy, what they really defended was the illusion of control, even if it meant gaslighting the public into trusting a man who couldn't find his way off stage without help. So Crockett can keep pretending she saw nothing, but the rest of us lived it. And no amount of spin can erase the fact that the American people saw through it and voted accordingly. And Democrats are going to keep losing if they keep trying to convince us that we didn't see what we see and that we didn't vote how we voted. And speaking of retards, here's Tim Wallace.
I also was on the ticket, quite honestly, because I could code talk to white guys watching football, fixing their truck, doing that I could put them at ease. I was the permission structure to say, look, you can do this and vote for this. And you look across those swing states, with the exception of Minnesota, we didn't get enough of those votes.
But you could be giving them permission on TV every day. You could have been messaging that way, and that isn't necessarily how it shook out.
Well, yes, but I also said I understand myself. I said I think I'll give you pretty good stuff, but I'll also give you 10% problematic. And so somebody's got to make the decision here to handle some of this stuff and to make it. And those are just decisions that were made. And I think after the fact, it is not second guessing or anything. I think it's fair to go back on and look at this. Look, we had the most qualified person who'd run for president in this country's history at the top of the ticket. That in itself should have got this thing won. We had, in my opinion, and you can disagree with me, I think history will prove me right, a very unqualified person on the other side. And you have to determine, how do you get those hits? What was the best way? Did it make sense to continue to, call him weird or call that out, or make this pitch that we are significantly different and our policies can improve your lives? And there's people that make those decisions, and whether it's right or wrong or not, I guess history will.
If Tim Walz is how Democrats think they're grabbing the bro vote by the pussy, then yeah, it all makes sense. These are the same people who think men can be women, math is racist, and football fans just need a little code talk from a white guy in a Carhartt jacket to vote for a party that openly despises them. This wasn't just cringe, it was a confession. Walz flat out admits he was picked by Kamala Harris not for ideas, not for leadership, but as some human permission slip for white working class men to stomach voting for a candidate who spent her career alienating them. That's not representation. That's manipulation with a smile. Now, what does this say about the modern Democrat Party? That they believe working class white men need to be handled, put at ease, as Walz says. Like there's some kind of volatile, barely tame voter base. It's the same condescending instinct that led Hillary Clinton to call half the country a basket of deplorables. Walz isn't building bridges. He's disguising contempt as strategy. And then there's his other gem, calling Kamala Harris the most qualified person to ever run for president. That's not even partisan. It's just delusional. More qualified than Lincoln, Reagan, Eisenhower, even Obama. The one time Kamala Harris actually ran a campaign of her own without any sort of DEI advantage, she was polling near the bottom before the primaries even began and dropped out before a single vote was cast in Iowa. Biden later picked her as vice president to satisfy a DEI checklist he had himself announced he was satisfied, not because she had grassroots support. And when it came for the 2024 nomination, the same identity first logic applied. She wasn't chosen because she inspired the country. She was chosen because she checked the right boxes. Yet Tim Walz still insists her win should have been automatic. Why? Because in their worldview, in the Democrat worldview, identity and credentials are supposed to matter more than results, likability, or God forbid, an actual connection to voters. What we're witnessing here is the Democrat Party's ongoing identity crisis. They claim to represent the working class, but their leadership sees regular Americans as demographic puzzles to decode, not people to understand. They think messaging is more important than authenticity. They think slapping a white face next to a progressive message will trick the very voters their policies leave behind to vote for them. But here's the reality. The working class doesn't want to be talked down to in code. They want someone who speaks plainly, delivers results, and respects their way of life. Tim Walz's comments don't just show why the Harris campaign flopped. They show why the left keeps losing ground, because they don't know how to talk to America without treating it like a science experiment. And as long as that continues, they'll keep wondering why the truck guy with footballs in the yard keeps voting for the so-called unqualified guy, who, at the very least, talks to them like they're human beings and respects their values. Now, in more evidence that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, Tim Walz's daughter keeps talking, and the highlight reel of it is she keeps getting bigger.
Running as an act is political, and you know who taught me that? Tim Walz. The first thing he told me when I was first getting into it in high school, granted, I don't really do it as much anymore. I go in spurts, but when I was first getting into it in high school, the first thing he told me was that running is a privilege, and being a part of the running community is a privilege that not all people have access to.
Oh my God.
Whether you do it recreationally or you race a lot or you are, at the elite level, it is a privilege. Whether it be you just having the time to run, access to funds to buy the gear, access to, healthy quality foods that fuel you as you're training and as you're running, access to, a safe, stable situation that allows you to be in a good mental state to be able to run. All of those things are hard to come by. And if you have them and are a part of the running community, that is a privilege. And that, again, was the first thing he taught me. So I don't really understand how platforming and administration that cuts mental health services, cuts, funding and literal shipments to food banks, is entirely hurting the climate, because you can get into running in the climate. That's a whole nother thing.
Fact check. Some of the greatest runners in the world come from some of the poorest nations on earth, Ethiopia and Kenya. To run, you don't need Lululemon in a climate-controlled gym. You need shoes, maybe, and the clothes on your back. In fact, many elite runners today started with far less. So when Hope Walls, daughter of the former VP pick Tim Walz, hops on TikTok to tell us that running is a privilege, that's not just clueless. It's everything wrong with a modern progressive mind. This is what happens when your worldview is shaped entirely by ideology and not reality. Hope Walls turns running, a basic universal human action, into a symbol of systemic oppression. She's parroting this warped belief that everything must be filtered through race, class, and the climate panic. Cultural Marxist at its peak. Running in her world isn't something you do for your health or joy. It's a political statement reserved for the elite. And God forbid someone encourages movement without first getting permission from the DEI police. Now, let's be real. This isn't really about running. This is about control. It's about drawing absurd moral lines between who's allowed to be seen, supported, or celebrated. This moment reveals something deeper about the left's cultural grip. Now, for some additional context, Hope Walls' bizarre rant didn't just pop out of her head like a turd. It's, in fact, a response to runner Kate Max going to the White House, which makes it clearer than day that this isn't about running. This is about control. It's about drawing absurd moral lines between who's allowed to be seen, supported, or celebrated. This moment reveals something deeper about the left's cultural grip. We're living in a time where self-importance is confused with moral clarity, and where basic apolitical acts like running are co-opted into the permanent culture war. People like Hope Walls have been so steeped in activist academia and TikTok think pieces that they've lost all sense of proportion. Everything is a battle. Everything is oppression. And if you step outside of their ideological box, you're evil. This kind of thinking is exactly why people are tuning out of the progressive movement. It's not that they don't care about justice. It's that most people with any shred of common sense are exhausted by the constant performative outrage. The left's influence over culture used to be based on vision. Now it's based on shame, division, and the idea that no act is innocent unless approved by the narrative machine. So to be absolutely clear, running is not a privilege. Running is freedom. And no amount of TikTok moralizing from the children of failed politicians is going to take any of that away.
Cutting, funds to climate initiatives and actively hurting the planet in that way, sending people away without due process, villainizing minorities. All of those things are preventing people from getting into the running community, which is what I thought Kate's platform was for. But it's also just damaging to society as a whole. We should not be normalizing these people. I'm not going to tell anyone what to do with their page, but I think it's insulting to my dad to leave a certain video pinned, especially when he stands for quite literally the opposite of what this administration is doing. You don't get to both sides this. It's not both sides. We are quite literally talking about good versus evil here, and I'm just really disappointed the whole thing happened. I was there when that video with my dad was filmed, and I was very impressed with Kate. And this is just extremely disappointing.
Hope Walls is a natural byproduct of a worldview where victimhood is the highest moral currency. Everything, and I mean everything, must be reframed as systemic oppression. So instead of running being a free, universal human act, it becomes an elite activity gatekept by climate change and oppression. And when someone like Kate Max tries to simply motivate people to move, the progressive response isn't gratitude, it's outrage, because she visited the wrong White House, because she didn't signal the correct virtues, because she didn't ask permission from the outrage mob. This is the problem with the modern left. It doesn't build movements anymore. It polices them. It doesn't celebrate progress. It shames deviation. It's not enough to be healthy, active, or healthy. You have to be politically pure. You have to be aligned, or else you're normalizing evil. That phrase, normalizing evil, is a language of people who no longer see their opponents as humans, but as monsters. The irony is that this kind of hyper-moralized performance is exactly why the Democrats keep losing touch with the American public. Because while Hope Walls is melting down over jogging content, regular people are tuning out. They're tired of being told they're bad people for not aligning with a 19-year-old's TikTok manifesto. They just want to live, move, work, and maybe even run without being told their shoelaces are a symbol of systemic oppression. You see, in a sane world, running is neutral. It's exercise, it's freedom, it's healthy for you. But in this warped ideological Democrat bubble, even your morning jog must be cleared by the progressive gods. AOC's got to check it off or else you can't do it. And if not, you're on the wrong side of history, buddy. Well, guess what? History isn't written by TikTok tantrums. It's written by people who refuse to be controlled by them. And speaking of Democrat fails, recently released Bodycam footage shows the left's favorite MS-13 member, Kilmar Abrego-Garcia, getting busted smuggling 8 illegals for cash. Can't wait to see Democrats try to explain this one.
How dark are your windows? Huh? How dark's the back windows?
Windows?
Stand by. How dark are they?
The color.
Yeah.
From Texas is good.
How many rows have you got in here? 4?
Where?
4 seats? 4 rows of seats?
Yeah, it's three seats. Yeah, with him. Yeah.
Did y'all put an extra one in?
Huh?
Did y'all put another one in?
No.
Did it come like this?
Use the truck.
I've never seen one with that many seats in it.
What you say? It's my boss.
I said I've never seen one with that many seats.
Oh,
in
really?
It. Yeah. That's why I was asking if you put an extra one in.
No, it's the same. Like this.
Okay.
You know what you got, right?
Huh?
You know what you got here, right?
No.
He's hauling these people for money, is what he's doing. But sometimes they commingle dope.
No, but
He,
did you see how squatted back?
there's 8 people in there.
Yeah, I know. I didn't know that. They put it.
The story of Kilmar Abrego-Garcia isn't just about a single traffic stop. It's a case study in how deep the rot goes inside today's Democrat Party. For weeks, Democrats have been virtue signaling over this man, calling him a Maryland father, a victim of Trump's lawlessness, a target of cruelty rather than consequence. They've said he never should have been deported to El Salvador. They framed him as a face of injustice, even flying down to Central America for photo ops, demanding his return. What they didn't mention, what they actively ignored, is the actual footage of him being pulled over in Tennessee while smuggling 8 unidentified men across the country in a vehicle that didn't even belong to him. No IDs, no luggage, no stories that lined up. Just a suspected MS-13 affiliate hauling these people for money, as the officer put it in the video. This is the heart of the issue. Democrats didn't just miss the facts. They buried them beneath a pile of emotion and identity politics. They knew this man had a record. They knew about the domestic violence allegations. They knew about the ICE flag. They knew he had been caught driving a car tied to a convicted human smuggler, but they saw political opportunity, not public risk. And in their desperation to score moral points against the Trump administration, they elevated a suspected gang member and human trafficker as a poster child for injustice. This is what happens when ideology replaces discernment. When the facts are inconvenient to the narrative, they get ignored. And the narrative now is that America's enforcement of its own immigration laws is the real evil. That ICE is the villain, not the trafficker. That borders are oppression and smuggling is a misunderstood career move. It's not compassion, it's delusion wrapped in self-righteousness. This is, by the way, the same party that allowed over 10 million people over the course of the Biden administration to enter the country illegally unvetted. And now they're turning an illegal criminal alien who's a member of MS-13 into a victim of border enforcement that they themselves avoided doing. You can't make this up. Anyway, when you see the Hakeem Jeffries of the world, the Cory Bookers, and other Democrat leaders demanding this man be brought back to the United States, understand what they're really advocating for. Not justice, not fairness, but impunity. They are willing to risk your safety, your laws, and your trust just to keep their narrative intact. This isn't about Kilmar Abrego-Garcia. This is about a party that will look the American people in the eye, call a trafficker a victim, and hope you're too distracted to notice the handoff. But those of us who are looking, yes, we noticed. And now the footage is out. And no amount of congressional speeches, TikTok live streams, or staged visits to Salvadorian prisons can change what's on that body cam. A man with cash, a van full of illegals, and a trail of deception that stretches across state lines and straight through the heart of the modern left's credibility. So ask yourself, how many more lies are we supposed to swallow in the name of compassion? How many more criminals will be framed as victims just because it's politically convenient? At what point does virtue signaling become a threat to public safety? This isn't just about one man or one mistake. It's about a political machine that's decided narrative matters more than truth, that emotion outweighs evidence, and that your security is secondary to its optics. If they're willing to bend reality this far for a known human trafficker, what else are they lying about? You don't need to be partisan to see the danger. You just need to be awake. It's time to wake up, folks. You tell me what you think in the comments down below. Have a terrific day. Peace.